So before we enter into, so the first 2 days will be a bit dense in terms of explanations, because you need to get the basics of all the stuff in order to be able to be on your computer and make and program your plants, let's say. But hopefully, I think starting in the afternoon, we are going to have hands-on sessions where we will explain something, and then you will go to your computer and make some practicals, and this will be a bit less demanding maybe for you to have some moment of relaxing with the computer. So first, before we get to this point, we need to continue a bit the conceptual introduction by introducing botanical principles and botanical concepts, botanical words that we are going to encounter during the training session. And this is why I sort of gathered a presentation of reminder or maybe new stuff about how the plant grows and what types of structure they are able to produce. So first, back to the basics. Actually, this is the basic, but when I went to school, I didn't learn about this. It was a bit crazy. At school, I didn't learn that plants actually are growing by the tip of their axis. Okay, so this is the axis here. And the plants are growing because there is a small population of cells here that is dividing and that is producing all the organs of the plant. So this is true for the aerial part, but this is also true for the underground part. And this population of cells, they are called the meristems. So you have the shoot apical meristem at the extremity of each shoot, and you have the root apical meristem at the other end. You have what all these are called axes, because the plant is producing linear segments. These are called axes. The roots, they have no leaves, of course, but the aerial part, the axis, they bear leaves. Not always, because the leaves are can fall. At the axial of the different leaf, you have frequently a new meristem. So the meristem are able to duplicate or to reproduce themselves and to leave on the stem new meristem that will, in turn, enter into growth and then produce new axes, and this will create the branching structure. So in a way, a plant is a sort of repetitive structure that is producing axis and axis and axis. Okay, the part between two leaves is called the internode. It's a portion of stem between the two leaves. And I think okay, you have the cotyledons, which are the first two preformed leaves in the getting out from the seed. And I think everything is here. Okay, any point about the nomenclature and the vocabulary? So when a stem has grown, you see that it has produced lateral branches or lateral buds or lateral organs. And these organs usually are arranged around the plant, and they produce the branching structure out of the meristem growth. At the tip of this, if you have a close-up on the tip, you see that the organs are very, very compactly positioned with respect to each other. And if you go even deeper into the structure, what you see is that the population of cells that I was referring to just before is here, at the very center of this crowded area. And you see the young organs that are being created by the meristem. What is remarkable is that these organs are usually not created at random. They are very well organized in the plant. And in particular, they are produced with an angle that is often, not all the time, but very often, close to 137 degrees.
All plants?
not on all plants, but on quite a lot of plants. And this is related to the notion of phyllotaxis. So the phyllotaxis is the arrangement of leaves or of organs around the stems. And you see on the mature stem that this can be organized in a very, very particular manner that evokes sometimes a crystal, could be a vegetal crystal. For instance, here you see that this is extremely repetitive and well-organized structure. You see in many places, in many cases, you see spirals, like in the sunflower head, cacti. And you have different types of motifs. So meaning that the meristems are not functioning all in the same way. They can produce different types of motifs. And there is something that is a certain organization law that is behind, that produces all these very regular structures. So we are not going to enter into the details and the mechanisms, because researchers are really studying how it is possible, and it's not the aim of this class to enter into these details. But what we could learn is how this meristem would produce structures and what types of structures are going to be observable as an output of this functioning. And actually people have classified a bit these structures, and I'm going to tell you about this classification. So it is possible that the meristem produce by growing one leaf or one organ at a time, and this will create what is called the alternate phyllotaxis. Often the alternate phyllotaxis is also called spiral, because it means that one organ will be created, then the other one, then the other one, with 137 degrees between the different organs. And this produces the spirals that you see on the stem of plants or on the sunflower head, like this one. What is striking, and I just give you this for noticing, maybe this can be also one project that we try to do during the course, is that if you look at the spirals and then you count them in one direction, actually you see that there are spirals in two directions, in the counterclockwise or in clockwise direction. So counterclockwise here, and you count the number of spirals and you find the number I. And I take the same pine cone and I count the number of spirals in the clockwise direction. I find a number J. And if I look at I and J, could be that they are random numbers, but actually it's not the case. Most of the time, these two numbers, they are consecutive numbers in the Fibonacci series, which is quite striking. You remember the Fibonacci series? I forgot to put it on the slide. Is the series that goes 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, etc. And what you see in this, what is particular in this series, that if you take two terms here, you add them and you get the next one. So if I give you the two first terms, then you are able to develop all the series. Okay. Again, I'm not going to enter into this. We start to understand quite well how this is possible at all. There are many researchers that have worked for years, not even to say for centuries, about this problem. And this is to say that the way plants are organizing their organs around the stems, which is very important for us because we want to create virtual plants, is not at all a random process. It's something that is extremely controlled and extremely precise. Okay, so now these were the plants where you have one organ per node. Now there are plants where you have 2 organs per node, and these are these 2 types of phyllotaxis where you have opposite leaves, where the 2 leaves arrive on different consecutive nodes in the same plane here, in the opposite manner. And you may have also opposite and decussate, meaning that the 2 leaves in this plane will be followed by 2 leaves in the perpendicular plane, and etc. And these are very common phyllotaxis. Now you may have more than 2 organs per node on the stem, and this is called whorled phyllotaxis, where you may have 3, 4, or more organs. And you may have, and if you have 3 organs or 4 organs, the organs will arrange in a way that the whorls, consecutive whorls, will minimize their overlapping in space. Meaning that if I have 120 degrees here, the next whorl will be positioned as a bisector of each of the 120 degrees. And here you have also 120 degrees for the next whorl. Okay? So, and this will alternate throughout the plant development. Well, this is just for you to know. There are plants in which you may have several organs per node, but not alternating in this way by making spirals, and this is called multi-jugate mode. But it's a bit more complicated, and I don't want to enter into these details. What is extremely important in plants, because as you know, plants are growing throughout their lives. It's not like us. We are almost done during our development in the first few months or few weeks, where we were after being an egg. For plants, the growth and the addition of new organs, it is an ongoing process throughout the life of the plant.
But sorry, like in crop models, for example, like you showed before, we model things that growth as a logistic curve with a saturation.
Yes, yes. So for one organ, the extension of the organ, the elongation of the organ will follow a sigmoidal curve. But the plant itself, of course, there will be a lifetime for the plant, especially for annual plants, because they live less than 1 year. So there will be a limited amount of time. But during their lifetime, they are able to produce new organs, not only at the beginning of their lives, like our organs, the hands, the limbs, etc., but throughout the life development. So I'm not speaking about the extension of one organ, but about the ability of the plant to produce many consecutive organs throughout their lives. Okay, answers?
Yeah.
Okay. So because of this specificity of plants, they are very sensitive to the environment and to what may occur into the environment. And usually, the plants are said to be plastic to their environment, to be able to produce this organ, but to adapt a bit the behavior and therefore the structure that they are able to produce to the type of event, external event or internal event, that may occur during the development. So it's a very plastic process. The activity of the meristem can be rhythmic, can be, we have seen that there was this phyllotaxis patterning possible during the development of the axis. The orientation of the axis can be special. The meristem, the way the lateral meristem are produced can also be particular. You can have different branching patterns, and the sexuality, the flowering of the plant can also occur in different ways, in different fashion for the different species of plants. So by combining all these elements, it is possible to analyze the ways, the different ways different plant species or different individual within plant species can develop. In trees, this has been very much studied, especially in the tropical forest, by Francis Halley, Haldeman, and Tomlinson, that were researchers, botanists, that were active in the 60s and the 70s, and even after, and that remarked that in trees you can, by using this type of concept, by analyzing and trying to categorize the different types of architecture produced by the different plants, you can organize this in a way that makes it possible to really grasp the different categories of growth that you can observe in nature. So it's not the point to give a course in botany. I wouldn't be able because I'm not really a botanist myself. But we need to enter into this in order to get the minimal vocabulary and minimal notions to understand what we are going to program in the computer in terms of plant development and how to program the plant architectures. So, the first thing is that the meristem growth can be varied, and you can make the distinction between what could be called continuous growth, where if you have the rate of production of the different organs, it's stable, okay? So the plant is producing at a constant rate the different organs. And this is to be opposed to a rate that would vary with acceleration, deceleration during the time life of the plant. That if you put this in a sort of cumulative growth, would give curves like this, where you have acceleration, then the plant would stop producing organs, then again producing organs, etc. And that would, in terms of architecture, produce these flushes of structures, like different flushes of leaves or flushes of stems or branching systems. By doing this, the meristem, by fluctuating its activity, can produce this rhythmic, spatially rhythmic aspect of organization on the plant in bits that we call growth units usually, that corresponds to what the meristem is able to do in one continuous sequence of growth. So it will produce a unit that would correspond to this part, for instance, and then stop, and then resume the growth, and then produce yet another unit, a bit of similar type, then stop, and etc. This may continue and continue over and over, or can vary, or can change throughout the plant life. And with this variation, what you observe is that the plants are able to grow in a modular manner. So it creates patterns that are going to be repeated over and over in the structure. And these patterns, depending on the plant species, they can be extremely different. It can be at very different scales, because, for instance, annual plants, they are making patterns in the constraints that they must develop them within 1 year. But trees, they would be able to develop patterns over years or over even centuries. And the patterns that you may look is at the level of leaves, for instance, in some small plants, but in trees could be at the level of the full branching systems, okay, depending on the complexity of the organism that is being developed. So here, for instance, you see that there is a pattern in this parinary plant. And this pattern is actually built up of small crownlets that populate the whole crown of the plant. And as I said before, the extremely important aspect of the plant growth is its plasticity. I think I have, yes. Here, this would be an araucaria plant, okay, grown in a very nice condition, very healthy. And this is the same plant, I mean, not exactly the same species, the same individual, but in a very different condition, where it's high in the mountain and there is a rock here that is preventing the plant to receive sufficient light. And you see that the development of the plant is dramatically affected by this growth condition. Okay, so the plants, as I told you, Allais, Haldeman, and Tomlinson, they proposed to categorize them in different families. These are called the architectural families, and they give rise to what is called the notion of architectural model. And the idea is to use different types of axes that we can describe in plants, different ways of growing of the axis of plants, in order to create these categories. And what was very surprising from their study is that you may expect that by categorizing all the traits that the plant axis may respect, you may have a super high number of combinations. And actually, they found out that is not the case. There are only 20 to 30, depends on the way you look at it, families of plant architecture systems. So 20 to 25, let's say 25 ways plants would develop their architectures if you look from a macroscopic point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, just to clarify this, is this what is observed, or is it a constraint by the kind of rules they have that you cannot have more than 30 pattern types or development types?
No. It's what is observed. I mean, they looked at what could be observed on many plants in the tropical forest. And tropical forest is important here because in the tropics there are less environmental constraints on the plants, so they were able to produce a huge variety of forms and shapes. And this is why it's mostly by looking at the trees in the tropical forest that they could analyze many types of shapes and then come up with the idea that but there are some commonalities between the different ways of developing. Although the plants are actually from the outside quite different, but the ways I'll tell you just briefly about this. The ways that they are constructing their architecture is similar. Okay, and these ways, they are only they could inventory 20 to 25 different ways, basically different ways, because of course in the details they would change, but at the macroscopic level there would be not so many number of ways. And what is very striking also is that this is true for trees. This was made and observed on trees, but actually this carries to many types of plants very easily, because plants are basically axes that are branched or borne by other axes. So the different ways to create branching structures, they are limited, and they are limited a bit by the same constraints that they were able to identify here. So there are two main categories: plants that are not branching and plants that are branching. And the plants that are branching, you will see that there are a number of ways to characterize the way they are branching. So to give you a more clear view of what is the architecture of a plant, these are, I don't know, 7 architectural models that can be described about and correspond to different ways plants may grow in nature. We can have a look briefly so that you can imagine a bit how it comes. So for instance, and the different ways a plant grows, they have been named after one major botanist that has studied particular species in this family. And for instance, this model where a stem can grow with leaves, so the meristem is active, at some point the meristem differentiates and becomes a flower or an inflorescence here. And then dies away, and then due to this, the whole stem will die. Okay? As soon as the meristem dies in a plant, then the axis dies, and if there is only one axis, the plant dies. Okay? So this is called the Haltom model. You have other types of model. This is the Lowenberg model, where there is an axis that grows a bit similarly to the one before, and then takes a terminal flower. But contrary to the Haltom model that we saw before, the plant is able to make branches. And then these branches, in turn, they will make a small plant, and they will, a small shoot, and they will again, in turn, get to the terminal flower. And then again and again, this process will repeat. And you see that the structure that is being built is something like a dichotomic structure. And this is called the Lowenberg model. So you have different types of models. I don't want to enter into all the models. But you may take different types of characteristics in order to make the difference between these models. For instance, here, you pay attention whether the axes they are straight up or horizontal. And because they are straight up and horizontal, it gives a certain type of growth of the plant, and that has been captured in this, what is called the Nozeran model. Another famous one, because many plants are, like for instance, wild cherry tree would be like this one, or the Pindalep in the south of France would be this Rao model. And basically, this is an axis that is able to branch with a very marked first axis, then dominated second axis, then the second axis are dominating the third axis, but everything tends to grow up and to be in a vertical position. Okay? And so this is called the Rao model. Okay, and then you have different types of models giving these 20 or 20 to 25 families. Okay. We will see, so we don't want to really go into the whether we are going to use a Rao model or a Lowenberg model. It's not what will be first interest to us, but what we can learn from this is different ways we can build up the architecture of a plant. Paying attention, for instance, to whether the branches are oriented upwards, whether the plants they make a terminal flower, whether they grow indefinitely, this type of notion. If you think about the ways plants grow, there are two major processes. One that is called the primary growth, and that is linked with the meristem activity. The meristem ability to produce organ, but specifically to produce the main stem. And then it's still linked with the meristem activity, but with the ability of the meristem to produce lateral meristem, and this is the branching process. So primary growth and branching. So the primary growth basically refers to two sub-processes. First, the process that is called organogenesis, by which the meristem is producing lateral organs. And the second, that is the elongation, because as you remember, in the about the spiral phyllotaxis, all the organs, they are produced in a very tiny place at the tip of the plant. And when they are produced, usually they are very close to each other. They are compact. And because of this, if the plant wants to populate the space, it needs to elongate the different pieces between the organs. And this is called the elongation process. So in order to build a proper architecture, you need to organogenesis, to produce organs, but they are all produced in the same place, let's say, and then to extend this, to separate the organs from each other.
And sorry, the elongation, is it that the cells are accumulating at the tip, or is it like these growing everywhere the same? Or?
Actually, the cells are accumulating the cells are dividing at the tip. So the cells, they keep the same size, basically, but they are dividing, and then they grow, and then when they reach a certain size, they divide the cells. Okay? By doing this, the overall tissue in the plant can grow. And during this growth, some specific population of cells at specific location will differentiate into lateral organs. So basically, the tissue is growing, lives in places very close to the tip apex, small areas that can differentiate and enter into growth by themselves. So everything is occurring in tiny regions at the tip. Then this tiny region starts to elongate and then produce their own organs on their own.
Okay, because I remember seeing some pictures of people putting paint on a stem and looking at the plant growing with a camera.
Yeah.
And then the paint was a bit spread like.
Yeah. Yes. If you well, it depends. Probably it's on the internode. If you take a portion of stem, so this would be a long stem. Okay. If you take a portion of stem like this, and it is just after organogenesis, so it's not very old. It's quite young, this part. Then when you come one moment later, it may be that this part is a bit higher now, due to the growth of the structure below. So this part is here. And now this part is going to elongate a bit. So while this structure is elongating, you see that the position of the different parts will change in time. But after some, because you said, and you're right, you were right, that the growth follows a sigmoidal curve. So after some time, the growth stops. The cell will stop to divide. And then this position will stay the same. And then this will grow a bit more, but not too much. And then after some time, it will stop to grow. Okay, so you see the sigmoidal curve here. Okay? It answers your question? Yes. So, well, and this is important actually for the type of work that we want to do. Basically, you can imagine that the first part of the plant gets growing and then after some time stops growing. But the upper part of the plant is still growing and it's still elongating. So in a plant stem, usually the basis of the stem does not grow anymore, but the tip part of the plant is in the process of elongating the organs. So you can consider two zones, one that is mature enough and that has stopped growing, and the second zone that is still in the process of elongating the different organs. And maybe a third zone that would be the location of the organogenesis at the very tip. Okay? Other question? Because this is very important because we are going to program this. Okay? So for the primary growth, okay, I will. What can a primary meristem? So the meristem that is at the tip of an axis is called the primary meristem because it's involved in the primary growth. And what can occur? It can stay active during not forever, but very long time. And this is called indefinite growth. But it can go a different way. It can differentiate, and this is called definite growth, into different things. One very common one is the flower. So the flower in a plant is the actual death of it's a transformation of the meristem. But the meristem, after producing the flower, is no longer able to grow the axis. So the flower is really the terminal organ of the stem. Okay? But it can produce also something a bit more complicated. Instead of producing one flower, it will produce a branching system of flowers. It can produce a thorn, it can produce tendrils, it can go different ways. But all these elements here, in all these cases, the stem will stop growing because the meristem transformed into something. During the primary growth, we have seen that there were rhythms. The meristem can accelerate and stop or decelerate and then resume the growth, etc. This will produce what we call growth units, which are the portion of stem developed during vegetative period without pause of the meristem, of the apical meristem. So, for instance, for this case, the meristem would grow, create the unit, which is a stem with leaves, and then stop growing here, and then resume the growth and create during the same, for instance, the same period of same year. It will make a first growth unit and then the second growth unit. Okay, and it will pause in between for different types of reasons that we most of the time don't really understand perfectly.
So what it differentiates the growth unit? Is it the time or the structure or the geometry?
Actually, this is both. I will come back to this a bit later. It's the way it functions, saying all these leaves were produced during one period of growth, but also this will entail the fact that there are markers on the plant that you can see actually in the. So it's also a geometric aspect. So the growth unit can be like this. After the second growth unit, could be the end of the shoot. So for instance, this is the apricot tree. In apricot tree, you would have several growth units, and then the shoot dies away. At least the terminal apex of the shoot dies away, and the branch is finished. And we will see that it's not the end of the plant because the plant has the ability to produce lateral branches, and it will resume the growth through the lateral branches. And this is a case where you have a first unit of growth, then the meristem dies, and then you have a second unit of growth. Okay. The branching. So we have seen the meristem is producing lateral organs, and what type of branching you can have. You may have the meristem that splits into two parts. This could be one way. And there are old plants, old families of plants like ferns, Selaginella, this type of plants that are systematically dichotomic, either in this way, which the two parts are equal, or either in this way, where there is one part that is dominating. I think this is, for instance, for ferns, you have this type of branching process. So here, it's not that the apical meristem is producing lateral meristem, it's more that the apical meristem is splitting into different parts. And this can be even in more a higher number of components. It may be that the lateral meristem the apical meristem produces axillary meristem. And then these axillary meristems, they may stay dormant or start their growth. And usually they will produce a small axis like this with leaves that are in dicotyledon plant. They are positioned on the lateral part of this, as you see on the picture here, of the new branch. And in monocotyledon plant, which is the herbs, let's say, the leaf is produced in a different position, as you see. The leaf is closer to the stem, to the main stem, than the axillary leaf. See, this is the axillary leaf, this one. This, a section. When you cut here, you have a section, and you see from above the different section of the leaves. So this is the section here. These two leaves are the two leaves that you are here. And in the monocotyledon plant, there are not two leaves, there is only one leaf. And this one leaf is opposite to the axillary leaf. Okay, and again, if you program a plant development, you need to take this into account in order to produce the right architecture of the plant. Still on the branching, the way you will see the branching in the plant may vary. It can be monopodial or sympodial. So these are very important concepts. In monopodial plant, you have a main stem that grows, a leader stem that dominates basically the lateral ones. It will be a main trunk or a main big axis. And the lateral axes are a bit less vigorous. And the main stem keeps on growing during plant life. In the sympodial case, it's the opposite. The main stem will grow up to a certain point where it will transform, for instance, creating a flower. This is what you see here. And then you will have relays, branching that will take over the growth of the main stem, because the main stem is stopped here, you see. And then the growth of the plant will not stop, will continue, but through the axillary axis. And then you may have different types of branching, where you have branching that may be with one branch taking over, with two branches taking over, and with more even than one branch taking over the leader. Again, on the branching can be immediate, and again, it's important. All these notions are important because this will help creating this 3D virtual plant programs. The branching can be immediate as soon as a lateral bud is made and starts to grow out. But it can be delayed. The bud, and in temperate regions, this is very frequent because you need to wait for the winter before you start growing out. So the plants, they have learned the ability of keeping their buds quiet while the season is not adequate. And then they will resume the growth of these buds, maybe not all the buds, but at least some of them, during the vegetative period in the spring or in the summer. And this is called delayed branching. So the first you have one axis. So you have one axis. It creates lateral bud like this. Okay, they keep quiet, they keep dormant, and then when the growth resumes, that is indicated by this double dash here, it will grow again, and then this will grow in sequence after that. So these are the lateral branches here. So they are delayed. We can also consider the position of this growth. It can be at the tip of after the stop of the main meristem. It can be at the tip, and usually, if this is at the tip and this is delayed, you will observe a gradient in the length or in the diameter of the different segments. And this is called acrotony. If you have the gradient in the middle, it would be mesotony, and if you have the gradient at the basis, it will be called basitony. And acrotony can be observed in many forest trees. If you have the Christmas trees that you probably have all observed, you have the whorl of branch that creates a layer of branches, but just below you have this acrotonic organization of small branchlets. Okay, so this is exactly this phenomenon. Basitony, you will find this in bushes, because the plant will tend to create branches at the bottom of the branch of the plant. To come back to your question, these are a couple of words about how this process can be observed on the plant itself. It would be nice, by the way, to go and see it in nature, because maybe after at some lunch pause we can do this. It's very easy actually to observe all these elements on the real plants. So if sorry, I didn't speak about. One second. Okay, I didn't speak about this. I will tell you. Yes. I forgot to mention that this immediate growth is called synleptic. It's a technical term, but you need to know at least. And when this is delayed, it's called proleptic. Okay, so simultaneous and afterwards. And then, if you have a synleptic branch, you see that the first nodes, they tend to be of the branch, they tend to be quite long, because the plant is actually in the process of elongating everything at the moment. So everything is locally elongated, including the internodes of the branch. If you come to this proleptic or delayed branching, then there was a bud that was created here. Okay, and the bud, when it was created, it was made of very small internodes. And then these internodes, and even the leaves were transformed if they were scales. So you don't see fully developed leaves. You see transformed leaves that are very tiny structure, that have a bit some function of leaves, but that correspond to the scales of the bud. Okay, so the scales of the bud that you see on a bud usually, they are actually these leaves corresponding to these small internodes that are made, that are actually the function of protecting the bud. And when you see the bud that is developing, you will have very small internodes compared to the type of internodes that you have here. This is an illustration of what we said. If you have different types of growth unit, sometimes the first growth unit was built during the winter. So here, while waiting during the winter, actually, or just in the growth period just before, while the bud was already dormant, some organs have been created within the bud and not elongating. So the organogenesis was alone without any elongation. And at the spring, this structure will go out will elongate and will create this part here. That would be the spring growth unit. Okay? So these were preformed structures within the bud. And so then the process will stop because all the structure will be elongated. And then growth may resume in spring after this first phase of creating the first growth unit and creating organs on the fly. Okay, and this will create the second growth unit. So you see that the different growth units, they may correspond to actually extremely different processes, or very different in time. And they will express in different ways. And at the limit, at the junction between these two units, you will find very small internodes, frequently.
So in theory, we can deduce the history of
yes.
by observing.
Yes, and there is a whole French and actually it's a worldwide school that is able. I mean, it is quite impressive. If you go with these guys, these botanists in the field, they look at a tree, and they are really able to, by looking at the different events in the tree, looking at these markers, they are really able to go and retrieve the history, most of the history of the tree, just by looking at the tree. So a lot of the history of the tree, not all of course, but a lot of the history of the tree is actually embedded into the architecture of the plant.
You can see if the tree has been stressed by droughts or.
Exactly, you can see if you are a bit used to it, there are signs that are quite easy to observe. Some others are a bit more challenging. You need to have the botanist eye. But many phenomena, you can observe them. What is interesting is that you don't need any device for it. You don't need just by the eye. So it's extremely interesting. And you can really, by when you go and walk in the forest, you can see events and learn more about the forest in which you are walking, just by looking at this phenomena. Okay. Okay. So now we are close to the end of this sort of brief presentation of what creates or what plant architecture is made of. We would like to understand how these architectures can be characterized. Actually, the possibilities are numerous, and it can go with first studying different organs at different scales. So the different organs are typically the internodes and the leaves, the growth unit, the axis, the branching system. So these are all structures that are nested within each other. An axis is made of growth unit. An axis is made of internodes. A branching system is made of axis. Okay, you see that there is a sort of they are not at the same scale, these structures. So you can consider a tree not only at a single scale but at different scales, and we will briefly mention this in the afternoon. But also there are morphological characteristics. So we were speaking about some of them. You can look at the axis and say whether they are vegetative or floral, whether they are in the aerial part or underground, whether the dimensions are short or long, whether the growth is continuous or it's determinate, whether the sexuality is terminal or lateral, because some plants. So this is important, this also to realize. So some plants will grow a stem and make a terminal flower. And some plants will grow a stem, but the stem keeps indeterminate, and they will make flowers laterally. So this is called lateral flowering. So so these are two typical ways for plants to produce flowers. And on one single plant, usually you don't find these two ways on one single species. What is extremely important with respect to the architecture is that here the axes are interrupted. This is the end of the axis. The flower terminates the axis. And here the terminal axis may continue to grow. So it's a way to produce the flower without preventing the main axis, the leader, to continue the growth. And this will result in completely different architecture of plants. Okay, so this simple strategy will imply complete different development of the plant. Okay? So, what people have done in the 70s, 80s, they started to see whether they could characterize the typical growth of species by using these different characters. And this is one type of table that one can build. This was made by Edelin, who is a French botanist, and he was studying this Abies balsamea, this plant, and by looking at what sort of axis they are, where are the flowers, when do they happen during the plant's life, all the different traits that we described before. So he was able to fill a table like this, where you have the different types of axes of order 1, 2, 3, at the different order of branching, and then trying to figure out how it would be for the growth, for the branching, for the lifespan, orientation, phyllotaxis, etc. And then you fill in this, and this is actually, and this was shown by this botanist in the 70s and 80s, that this is a sort of signature of the plant growth, of the plant architecture. Okay, so for instance, if I look at the phyllotaxis, what I see is that for this plant, phyllotaxis is of type spiral for the two first orders, and then obviously after that, it turns to bilateral phyllotaxis. So it's really typical of the way the plant is growing. Okay. And this is very important if you want to, for instance, to program this type of development in a computer, because you would need to follow this type of rules in order to have a plant that is faithful to the botanical way of growing. Okay? And with this, what they could produce is a sort of architectural view of the plant, which we could quote a sort of ideotype, but this was called architectural unit, saying that this is the way a plant grows. In general, if we forget about all the details, the general traits of the growth are this one, the one in the table before. So in the mature plant, the plant which has reached the sexuality, so that has already produced mostly what it can produce during its life. This is called the architectural unit with all the typical axes, so axis order 1, order 2, there is no order 3. Yes, there are order 3 and 4 here. And you see that the axes, they have female flowers and the male flowers on the different axes, and not in all the positions. They are very precisely positioned depending on the type of axis. Okay?
And how many axes can we get on a plant?
Sorry?
How many axes?
Well, this depends completely on the types of axis, not axis. How many types of axis? So this orders.
What is the maximum order?
So order is, so this is order 1. It's the number of branching events that you can find if you follow the path to the root. Like for instance here, I take 1 here, and then I go back to the root. So the order of this is 2. Here I follow here. Yeah. There is no event, so the order is 1 by definition. Here I follow, there is 1 order, sorry, I am order 1 on the trunk, then there is a branching event that is order 2, then there is another branching event, this is order 3. So okay.
And what is the maximum?
There are, this could be one trait that you consider in order to categorize the type of plant that you have. But usually this can vary depending. After some point, the plants, they tend to get old, and then they will start to branch, but not with very huge segments or very huge axes. They will start to produce very tiny structures like this. And these tiny structures, you see that you can stack them quite long. And this could produce orders super high. So this is why they are not so much interested in orders by per se, but they are more interested on the type of axis. So they will characterize, for instance, as soon as you start to produce this, this would be a category of axis or a category of branching structure. Because you say the plant started to produce these very tiny twigs. Okay?
And so just maybe it's a question out of the topics. How an agricultural a farmer could control the branching of a tree? I know, for example, for olive trees, I think the farmers are trying to control the shape for easy picking.
Yes, yes. And for olive trees, I mean, they are slightly pruned. But there are trees like fruit trees, like olive trees, but like pear or apple tree or well, all these even apricot tree we were mentioning before. All these trees are heavily cut in order to shape them so that you can access the fruit. But not only so that you can access the fruit. The pruning strategy is intended to leave the fruit rather low so that you can access them, but also to favor the growing of the fruit. If you prune out branches, you may favor the growth of certain part of the plant and then favor the growth of the fruit, or favor the alternance, the fact that the plant wouldn't be alterning, because you know that if you leave a fruit tree growing over, on its own, it may produce super many flowers during 1 year, and then the next year it will be exhausted in a way, and cannot produce many flowers and many fruits. So in order to prevent this, you need to prune out some fruits the first year so that it remains a bit of energy for the plant to produce fruits the year after, and then to have more continuous production over the years. Okay? Okay, and we will finish a bit by this notion on large trees. There is this notion that a tree or a plant, because I am on trees, but this is actually true for many plants, they can reiterate. So when a tree gets to the adult age, this was described by this architectural unit that is typical of a tree at this adult age. Then if you continue to grow, the tree won't stop at this point, but will start a transformation process by reiterating part of its structure. So it will stop, in a way, producing new elements that were not seen before, but will start to reiterate some trees. So for instance, this is a Virala tree taken by the botanist Daniel Barthelemy, and in the tropical forest. And you see that the tree is this one, and you see that a branch was coming out. So probably in the beginning it was a lateral branch. So the tree was going like this. So there was a lateral branch like this. The branch continued to grow. The tree continued to grow, then making these bits here. And then at some point, a new branch here, a new lateral branch, started to grow out from the middle of a branch. This is why you have this type of very sharp angle here, and started to grow and compete in a way with the main tree, and reproducing all the steps that you can observe on the plant development usually, almost all the steps or all the steps. And this part was simply pruned out by the tree activity, because all the matter and all the energy of the plant was invested in this new branch. So this just fold away. So, and this is the reason why you obtain this type of shapes in big plants. So
Is it rare or?
no, it's super. I mean, you have this everywhere. So this was very. This is why I took this picture. This is very dramatic effect here, and you see it very well because you have one tree here and you have a similar tree here. Okay, so it's really striking. It may be less striking, but with if you look for it in a tree, then you will start to see it, because you will start to see small trees inside small trees. So it's a matter of just being aware of the phenomenon, and then looking at trees and trying to figure out where you can find this type of thing. But probably we can go out at some point and look for a reiteration of plant. But even on this happens on many plants. The reiteration can be. I just keep on this, and then it will go back to your question. The reiteration can be natural if the tree is developing. Okay, at some point you see that there are small trees starting to grow on the main plant trunk. There are small trees that will start to arrive, and if the plant was really hierarchized in the beginning, you lose the hierarchy of axis when the plant starts to colonize the space with all these many big structures. And you see that this can occur like in simultaneous manner, or deferred, like delayed or simultaneously within the tree architecture. So you obtain the same structure, but using different paths. Okay. So this was reiteration. This is called adaptive reiteration, and this occurs in a natural manner in many trees. But you can have what is called traumatic reiteration, subsequently arriving due to the pruning or to an accident occurring on some stem of the plant. So, for instance, if you cut in a fruit tree, if you cut one of the axes, then you will have on rosebud, on a rose plant. Okay, so if you cut the axis of a plant, then you will have reiteration of the main axis on the lateral side, and then new flowers. And this may be a strategy precisely to reproduce plant axis every year or at every growing period. It can be due to an accident here, where these branches have been cut, and then the trees start to. This can be also in old trees. In old trees, the crown of the tree starts to decrease in vigor, lose the leaves, and then the crown starts to decrease downwards on the tree, making this type of structures, where you have very small trees. So they are not completely equivalent to the full tree, because they are really, at the same time, they want to create trees, but they are less vigorous than the original plant. Yes, it's the same type of process. So what we have is that in the end, what you must keep in mind is that the architectural models, they correspond to different types of axes and the way to classify them. And the last point that we will study for today is the fact that, okay, this gives an ideal view of the plant growth, but of course, it's not as schematic as this. If you look into the details, you will find complementary information. And this complementary information may be linked with what we call morphological gradients, which are not only the fact that the axis will be of order 1, order 2, and with such and such qualitative traits, but that there will be quantitative gradients within these systems. So, to give you a couple of examples, here you would have a gradient. So this graph on this plant is showing the number of nodes in the branch 2 before, not before, terminal flowering. Okay, and you see that the number of nodes decreases before it reaches the terminal flowering. So you would have here a number of nodes here, and then a number of nodes here, and then a number of nodes here. And then this number of nodes decreases. And you see that the farther away you are from the trunk, then the fewer nodes, the fewer leaves you are going to produce. And this is a type of gradient that you may want to reproduce in the growth of your plant. So this is another rate at a different scale, at the level of reiterations in plants. And you see that the reiterations themselves, they may have a gradient. Like the first ones, they are super big, at most competing with the main trunk. And then after that, you will see that the reiteration, if you follow, like for instance, the branch here, there are reiterations, but there is a gradient that cuts down their vigor as you go far away from the main leader. Okay, and then you have this here, but you have this also in altitude, where you see that the plants, they tend to be much less than the leader. Okay? And this led the biologist to this notion that is quite central, I think, in what we want to do, which is the notion of physiological age of axis. So the idea is to say, in order to represent the different axes of a plant, I will use one single variable that I will call the age, or the physiological age. And that will be able to capture the different, in one single synthetic variable, the different traits that I can find corresponding to this axis. So for instance, and the idea, and this is quite unexpected in a way, because to summarize what can occur, including the gradients within one single variable, that would sort of, in a synthetic manner, capture the evolution in the development of the plant structure, of the plant axis. And the idea is precisely this. You say that, don't look at the bottom part, but you said that in the beginning, the axis will be super strong, super vigorous, super big. Okay, but as you progress in the plant structure, this will decrease, the vigor will decrease, the length will decrease, the diameter will decrease, up to the moment where you reach the terminal twigs, the terminal branches, where you are close to the production of flowers. And then when you reach the flowers, then let's say the differentiation of the axis has been completed, and then you will produce, you are able only to produce this type of terminal small branch or terminal flower or flower. So the idea is to say, okay, all these phenomena can be captured into one single parameter, which is this physiological age, which will represent the degree of vigor of the development of my plant at different positions in the plant. And if you map this degree with colors here on the plant, you see that, for instance, here the blue will be the most vigorous axis, okay? And you see that at some point, the most vigorous axis is duplicating, reminiscent of a reiteration in the plant. You see that you may be at order, here we are at order 1, here order 2, here order 3, and there is violet at order 3. And you see that violet can occur also at order 2 on the trunk. So due to this, it may be that the same type of axis is present at different orders. So same type of axis, meaning same production that the meristem producing this axis can produce. Okay? So it's a view of, it's a human view on the trees, but it's a very convenient view. It doesn't mean that this is true. It doesn't mean that behind the physiology of the plant is really going this way. But it's very convenient to look at the plant in this way in order to simplify how we describe the plant architecture in order to produce the plant structure. So we will use this quite heavily in the plant in the design of plant models. And actually this corresponds to this notion that plant axis can be seen as a variation on the theme of producing an axis. With when you have young aged axis, you will have plenty of phenomena that can be produced by the meristem. And then as you get older, the number of things that you can do will decrease in number and in vigor. And this phenomenon has been remarked by many botanists in the last century, starting from, for instance, Troll, Arber, Halley and Haldeman and Tomlinson, Gatsuk, Nosran, Barthélemy, and well, many others. They have really, and they were the term that were used were quite different: vigor, physiological age, morphogenetic program, age state, differentiation state. But all these notions, they are really connected with each other and speak about this. So I just call it. You could also call you could also relate this to the meristem differentiation as well. So all this corresponds to different terminology that reflect a profound and same botanical idea behind. And the hypothesis that we can make and that we will make, again, it's not absolutely sure that the plants are behaved like this, but it is a convenience for describing the plant structure, and the hypothesis would be that the meristem, yes, I must say this first. The architecture is built by the meristems. So we need to link this notion of axis, types of axis, physiological age, to the meristem. How a meristem can produce a certain axis with certain physiological age. Okay? And to make this link, we will assume that the same axis, the same types of axis, in the same physiological age, will be produced by meristem that are in the same physiological state. Okay, so this is, so the axis, I can make you a picture. Okay, imagine that I have a plant like this, like this. Okay, and this is an axis of type 3, this one. And this is an axis of type 3, or physiological age 3. Okay? So what you see is that this axis occurs on the trunk, and this axis occurs on a branch. So they have the same type, but they are not occurring at the same place, at the same type of place in the plant. Okay? So what I assume is that during the growth, the meristem that produced this branch was of the same type as the meristem that produced this branch. And this is why they are of the same type in the end. Okay? So this is an assumption. It's not the truth.
And the meristem state, is it some notion related to what?
The meristem state. So the meristem state would be related to the physiology and to the genetics of the system. So the meristem is a dome of cells. The cells are interpreting the genetics in the context of the functioning of the meristem, the physiology. And in this context, so the machinery of the genetics machinery in the context of the local physiology will produce what you observe, and also in the context of the environment. Okay, so it's the mix between these three components that actually is behind this notion of physiological state. Okay, so it's quite complex. So this is why, so on the one hand, it's quite complex. So it's very, it may appear to be oversimplistic to say that this state is the same as this one because they produce similar things. Okay, it may be oversimplistic. On the other hand, it is a super simplification that is really extremely useful when you create computer programs of plants. Now, it remains to be seen, and there are some works in this area, whether this hypothesis behind this, behind the functioning of plants is true to some extent or not, and in which conditions.
It's more than just the possible differentiations of cells. Like it's not only the what you can produce; it's also the phyllotaxis.
Yes, it's everything. Yes, yeah. But when I say a type of axis here, it's really the phyllotaxis, the length, the elongation of organs. It's everything that is included here. Okay. The physiological state. This is why it is quite interesting. It synthesized a lot of things that might occur that maybe in the detail completely, I mean not completely, but very different or with a huge variability, but actually in the end will produce something that is very close to other things produced by same meristem in the same physiological state. Yes? Any questions? Because it is a bit important, because we really are going to use heavily this to construct plants.
So what we can keep in mind is a type of axis. If two types of axes are similar in the aspect,
yes.
So we can assume that they are originated from the same meristem,
yes.
Same type of meristem.
It's not that we can assume; it's that we will assume.
Okay.
Because so we are not allowed to assume. Okay. We will make the assumption. Okay. But so again, it doesn't mean that is a physiological reality. But it means that for us, it would be super convenient to create plant architecture in the computer. And why? Because when you see a plant, it's very easy to access to the end result of the architecture, to what you see. Okay, but it's very difficult unless you have research means to enter into the meristem, look at the physiology, look at the genetics. Okay, so we don't know. In most of the time, we don't know what is the state of the meristem. So we make, but in the computer, we want to reproduce the growth of the plant using the meristem. So I need to make assumptions, and this is a super convenient but very efficient assumption to make. If the end product is the same, the meristem should be the same. Okay? It's clear? Okay, I think we are almost done. So just to give yet another picture of this, the meristem are producing. So I like this. I don't remember who told me this once. The plant, you can see it as the trajectory of all the meristem in space. I like this view of the plant. So what you see here are all the trajectories of the meristems. What we assume is that through this trajectory, each meristem was differentiating, okay, and gets older and older and older. And this creates this type of structures. When I colored with the same color the position where the meristem were in the same state, and you see that by reproducing, if I manage in the computer to reproduce this type of architecture based on the meristem state, and what I'm going to say is that if I am in a certain state, I am able to do this and this and this. If I'm in a different state, I'm able to do this, but not this. And by making this type of assumption, I will be able to create a program that will reproduce this type of architecture. Okay? I think we are done. I'm sorry this was a bit longish, but we really need this type of knowledge in order to speak about the different concepts that we are going to use and to make use of them in the construction and the design of computer programs. So, but now it's done, so we are able to proceed with the rest. Okay? Thank you.